Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Breaking the Lens of Bias. Uh, Not too much has been going on in the world that I could speak out to on bias. I mean, there is, but I'm trying to get away and veer on a little different course today. Um, and the reason for it is that I have found when I learn more about the psychology behind biases, what makes us form our biases in our own psyche and how that plays out, it helps to see what is happening in the world in general and in your own life in particular. So I've been kind of looking at a book a little bit by Vivek Murthy, who is or was the Surgeon General of the United States. And it's called Together. And so he's talking about some studies that have been done, and in this is a study from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. So, uh, putting on my librarian hat, a very legitimate publication, scientific publication, and he says there is a cognitive bias known as motivation attribution asymmetry, which tells us that our beliefs are grounded in love, while our opponents are based in hate. The studies found that this bias applies to Israelis who believe that they are fighting out of love for their people, while the Palestinians are driven by hatred, and vice versa. The same bias infects both Democrats and Republicans in America, who believe that their own fervor is driven by love of this country, while wondering why the other party hates us. And so that is really interesting. When I look in my own personal life about when I start to think somebody's doing something wrong or they're against me, um, I'm often attributing uh, bad motives on their part. They don't like me. Uh, they're they're out to sabotage whatever is going on, um, and other things like that. And so it's very interesting when I can shift that bias, when I recognize what is happening in my own life and say, well, this is where that person is coming from. Okay. If I assume that they're coming from a position of hatred, and I'm coming from a position of love, um, it's obviously going to be adversarial. But if I find that I can shift and say, they're also coming from a position of love, they just have a different perspective, it opens up the possibilities for me to break my own lenses of bias that I have in that situation and to look at the situation and see if we can find some common ground. We both have a love for whatever is happening. We want to make the situation better or at the very least tolerable. We want to come up with a solution to whatever is behind that and come together and find something that we both can believe in rather than just thinking it is black or white, either or, Democrat, Republican, Israeli or Palestinian. Um, However that plays out in your personal life. So um, the interesting thing about this is he goes on to say the contempt that results from this type of bias is visceral and righteous, feeding not just intolerance but also the same emotional stew that makes loneliness so toxic. If you must deal with people who believe you're driven by hatred, you're bound to feel rejected and frustrated. But if you're confronting someone you believe is driven by hatred, then your stress levels spike out of fear and distrust. I'm I go back and I think about all the controversy surrounding and to some extent still surrounding the pandemic. Okay, we were already in a stressful time. Things happened, at the outset of the pandemic. People were getting ill very quickly. There were, a number of people dying way beyond the norm as a result of the pandemic. And so everybody was going around and trying to, uh, you know, place blame, um, whether or not there was valid scientific evidence for the vaccines, whether or not we should stay masked, whether or not we should stay isolated. Um, and so, if you believed one side and somebody believed the other side, there was this hatred going back and forth. Well, you're ridiculous, you're stupid, so on and so forth regarding that. And so, when it's only makes sense that many people feel rejected and frustrated by people who have the opposite beliefs from ourselves. Instead of trying to come to an understanding, I understand that you believe that. I respectfully disagree with you. Can we come together and have these sense of norms, you know, so that we can all live together harmoniously? Now, that might be a little bit, pie in the sky, um, she poo poo kind of thinking. But if we're stuck in those emotions, that hatred, that disgust, that intolerance, and have that emotional stew, we think we are isolated and we will tend to find people. Instead of being alone in our loneliness and our point of view, we will find and gravitate towards people who believe the same things that we do. And then we have this little bubble of people, and we're all against the people in the other bubble who think the same thing, who have gathered around their people to do that. And there's that lack of discourse, there's that lack of inquiry, um, among people to do that. So I'm going to continue a little bit in this paragraph. This is the last paragraph. But the natural response to protect ourselves in the face of threat, so people who are against us are a threat to us, is to close down and prejudge others instead of opening up and giving them the benefit of the doubt. We can't listen to another point of view nearly as well when we're angry and scared. We all know this from our personal conflicts, and that drives us apart. Too often, we're also filled with contempt, which poses a big obstacle when we try to come together. Exactly what I just summarized that paragraph, but I like how the way he puts that. So the natural response that we have is to protect ourselves. So if our beliefs are being challenged, we will often want to protect ourselves and double down, and then we can get into other forms of bias. So when I talked about the bubbles, group think, finding people who think like you do only reinforces your thinking and further closes you to listening to other opinions. Um, some of the other biases, let me grab my notes here on this, could be, well, in group bias. You unfairly favor those who belong to your group. Again, it's black and white thinking, it's a fallacy in thinking. Um, you can fall to the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, where rather than looking at the whole sum of evidence surrounding your opinion on a particular issue, you are actually cherry picking data clusters to suit an argument, or finding a pattern to fit your presumption. So, a lot of that has to do also with like anecdotal evidence. So if you found someone who used uh, the horse pills, and the name forgets me, eludes me right now, to combat COVID, uh, and they beat COVID. Okay, great. Well, most people do beat COVID. It's just very unpleasant, and the side effects, and there are people who don't. So you don't know if that works. That's just what I'm kind of saying. Um, and so you're cherry picking your data. And so then there's evidence. So somebody has done a study. If you're at all familiar with how scientific studies are done, They're double blind studies. They have a large cluster um, of people. And sometimes they'll say, well, we've done this initial study and this is what we found. That doesn't mean that there is a cure for cancer if, in one small group of population, there is a statistical change in, how cancer progresses or something like that. There's more studies that need to be done on a wider population in order to do that. So when you find that one study that supports your point of view, you hold on to that and but this study, but this study, but this study, and it's one study. Um, so the important thing is to to look at that and to be aware that we have that motivation attribution asymmetry, that we we are grounded in love and we're coming from that place. I want you to take a vaccine because I think it's going to save your life and it's going to save other people's lives. I don't want you to take a vaccine because I think it's going to be harmful to you in the long run because the long term effects are unknown. Um, just some of the arguments about that. And again, I'm not here to debate either side on that. What I'm here is that most of us aren't experts on um, public health or uh, how viruses work in different therapies and things like that. Most of us are not. The great majority of us are not. And so we shouldn't pretend to be. We may have our biases based on our reading. We may have biases based on our understanding. We may have biases that come from our own bubbles. That somebody that I trust says this, so I'm going to believe that. And really, um, and then you take being in those bubbles and saying the other people are horrible people and they're trying to kill us and things like that. And that's when you get this fueled violence against various public figures who are proponents of the other side. Which I think, if we actually really think about that, that is by most standards um, wrong by our morality that we hold by our laws that we hold by. It's not a moral thing. It's not a right thing. It's not a lawful thing to say, we're going to go kill somebody because they do this. They have this point of view and they're a proponent of it and they're putting it out there publicly. So I say all that is in breaking your own lenses of bias, rather than look at those larger issues. Um, what I'm going to do this week, and I would encourage you to do the same, is to notice when I have that uncomfortable feeling and I'm thinking that somebody's wrong and I have contemptuous beliefs about them, and ask myself, is this really true? Is this really what they're thinking? And the truth of the matter is I know that I cannot know exactly what someone else is thinking. I can predict it based on what they say and how they act and what they do. But again, are they in their bubble reinforcing that opinion? Um, or are they willing to take a step back and say, I'm a person and I love you. I want to know what you're thinking. I want to understand what it is that you are thinking and how you are going to do that. Hopefully, that will help you both break that, and it will open the conversation, and it will break the bias of motivation, attribution, symmetry, so that you can come together and hopefully realize that everything in this world is not black and white, love or hate, Democrat or Republican, Israeli, Palestinian, pro-vax, anti-vax. And so I will leave it at that, and I will hope that you can again take this little lesson that I've learned this week and that I've been pondering on, and take it and see if you can use it in your own personal life. Um, and use it when you look at what's happening in the world. So Thank you again for tuning in to another episode of Breaking the Lens of Bias. My name is Kat Killian. I will see you again next week. Have a great day.